The moment HOA Karen grabbed my daughter by the hair in a crowded public space, time didn't slow down. It snapped. There was no warning, no build-up, no misunderstanding that could soften what followed. 1 second my child was standing where she was supposed to be, and the next she was being yanked backward like an object someone felt entitled to move. HOA Karen didn't hesitate, didn't look around, didn't question herself. She acted with the confidence of someone who had never been stopped before. Children screamed. Adults froze. My daughter's feet scraped helplessly against the floor as her body followed the pull of someone else's rage. And in that instant, HOA Karen made a mistake she could never undo. Because she assumed the woman who would come for her afterward was powerless. She assumed wrong. Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? I didn't witness the first second of it, but I would see it later from every angle imaginable. I would hear it described in voices that shook and broke mid-sentence. I would watch it replayed until the images burned into my memory permanently. HOA Karen's hand fisted in my daughter's hair, my daughter's mouth open in a soundless cry, the shock on the faces of people who suddenly realized they were watching a line being crossed that could never be uncrossed. HOA Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She wasn't protecting anyone. She wasn't correcting behavior. She was demonstrating power the only way she knew how, by choosing someone smaller and making sure everyone saw it. My daughter was 8 years old. She was small for her age. She had never been in trouble at school. She had never raised her voice at an adult. She was exactly the kind of child people like HOA Karen assume will stay quiet when hurt. The space where it happened was loud before it went silent. Conversations cut off mid-word. Movement stalled. People stared, waiting for someone else to intervene, someone else to step in, someone else to be braver than they were. For a few long seconds, no one moved. HOA Karen dragged my daughter forward another step, then another. My daughter's hands reached back instinctively, grasping at the wrist that held her, trying to make the pain stop. Her knees buckled. Her shoes squeaked uselessly against the floor. That was when the screams started, sharp and panicked, the kind that makes every adult in the room feel like they've failed at the same time. A teacher finally lunged forward. Someone shouted HOA Karen's name. Someone else yelled for her to stop. The grip loosened just enough for my daughter to collapse where she was, crumpling in on herself, sobbing and disoriented. HOA Karen stepped back, chest rising and falling, her face tight with something that looked disturbingly close to satisfaction. She didn't apologize. She didn't check if my daughter was okay. She didn't look ashamed. She looked justified. That was the part that stayed with witnesses long after the moment ended. Not just the violence, but the certainty behind it. The absolute conviction that she had every right to do what she did, and that nothing serious would happen to her because of it. HOA Karen straightened her clothes. She adjusted her posture. She said something about respect and discipline, loud enough for everyone to hear. She spoke like she was the injured party, like the scene unfolding around her was an inconvenience she had been forced to endure. My daughter was still on the floor when HOA Karen turned away. She didn't wait for administration. She didn't wait for security. She walked out as if the incident was already over in her mind. By the time I was notified, HOA Karen was gone. The space she left behind was chaos, held together by shock. Children crying, adults speaking in hushed, urgent tones. My daughter being guided into another room, her hair tangled, her breathing uneven, her entire body shaking. I didn't hear about it from HOA Karen. I didn't hear about it from someone trying to explain or justify. I heard about it from a voice that struggled to stay professional while delivering the kind of news no parent is ever ready to receive. I was told there had been an incident. I was told my daughter was hurt. I was told I needed to come immediately. Everything else disappeared after that. The day before it, the plans after it, the idea that this was just another ordinary moment in our lives. By the time I arrived, the narrative had already started forming without me. People were whispering HOA Karen's name. Some sounded horrified, some sounded confused. A few sounded defensive, already preparing excuses on her behalf. That was when I understood something important. HOA Karen had done this before. Maybe not exactly like this, but enough times to believe she could. Enough times to believe no one would stop her. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the person whose child she assaulted did not rely on HOA approval, social standing, or polite silence. She didn't know the authority she thought she wielded was imaginary the moment it met real consequences. She didn't know that the woman who would confront her wasn't asking for accountability, she was bringing it. Before the badge ever rested on my chest, before anyone in this town learned to lower their voice when I entered a room, I was a mother trying to keep a small life safe in an unpredictable world. Authority didn't begin with my title. It began with sleepless nights, scraped knees, and promises whispered in the dark that nothing would ever hurt my child if I could stop it. I didn't choose law enforcement because I craved power. I chose it because I understood what it meant to stand between harm and someone who couldn't protect themselves yet. Emma was born into a quieter version of my life, one that ended the night her father never came home. A car accident took him from us without warning, without preparation, without mercy. From that moment on, it was just the two of us. No backup parent, no shared burden. Every responsibility and every fear landed squarely on my shoulders. I learned how to be strong without becoming hard, how to be firm without becoming cruel, and how to lead without intimidating the people around me. Our mornings were simple. Breakfast at the same small table, her backpack always too heavy for her frame, her hair brushed carefully because she hated when it tugged. I never rushed that part. Hair is intimate when you're a child. It's trust. It's comfort. It's safety. I never imagined it would become the source of her trauma. The day HOA Karen attacked her started like any other school day. Emma was excited about lunch because it was one of the few days they served her favorite meal. She hugged me before getting out of the car, told me she loved me, and ran toward the building without looking back. There was no warning sign, no intuition whispering that something was wrong, just routine, and that made what followed even harder to process. When the call came, it didn't announce itself as life-changing. It came as urgency wrapped in professionalism, a voice trying not to fracture while delivering news it wasn't trained to soften. I was told there had been an incident. I was told my daughter was injured. I was told to come immediately. No details, no explanations, just a destination and a rising sense of dread. Driving to the school, my mind ran through possibilities, each worse than the last. Accidents, falls, fights. Never once did it land on the truth waiting for me. Never once did I imagine another adult would be the source of my child's injuries. That kind of violence feels unthinkable until it isn't. When I arrived, the shift from sheriff to mother happened instantly. Titles dissolved. Authority narrowed into a single purpose. I didn't care who recognized me or who didn't. I didn't care how I looked or whether procedure was being followed. I followed the sound of crying down the hallway and into the nurse's office, where my world sat broken on an examination bed. Emma tried to be brave when she saw me. She wiped her eyes like she didn't want me to see how scared she was. That alone told me how deeply this had affected her. Children don't hide pain unless they think it will cause trouble. Her hair was uneven, strands pulled loose in places I had brushed gently that very morning. Her scalp was red. Her hands trembled when she reached for me. She told me what happened in pieces, stopping to breathe between sobs. She told me she didn't do anything wrong. She told me the woman was yelling. She told me it hurt. She told me everyone was watching. That was the detail that stayed with me. The audience. The public nature of the humiliation. HOA. Karen didn't just hurt my child. She made sure my child knew she was being hurt in front of others. Authority doesn't always announce itself with force. Sometimes it waits, quiet and controlled, gathering facts while emotions burn underneath. I held Emma and told her she was safe now. I told her I believed her. I told her she didn't deserve any of it. I didn't tell her what I was about to do. Children don't need to carry the weight of justice. They just need to know it exists. When I asked the principal for footage, for statements, for accountability, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My authority wasn't performative. It was structural. It didn't rely on intimidation or titles thrown around for effect. It relied on inevitability, on process, on follow-through. HOA Karen thought authority came from proximity to influence, from committees and boards and social leverage. She thought it was something you could wear like jewelry and take off when inconvenient. She had never met the kind of authority that doesn't need permission to act. By the time I left the school with Emma headed to the hospital, two things were set in motion. My daughter's healing which would take time and care and patience. And HOA Karen's collapse, which would begin the moment she realized the person she tried to dominate was protected by something she couldn't override. She didn't know it yet, but the balance had already shifted. HOA Karen didn't appear out of nowhere, and she didn't become bold by accident. People like her are cultivated by systems that reward control while punishing resistance. The HOA was not just a neighborhood association to her. It was a training ground, a rehearsal space where she learned how far she could push before anyone pushed back. Every warning letter ignored, every complaint dismissed, every resident who chose silence over confrontation taught her the same lesson. She could escalate without consequence. Her authority wasn't loud at first. It arrived wrapped in concern and procedure. She volunteered for committees, offered to help, and positioned herself as indispensable. Over time, her presence became unavoidable. Meetings revolved around her, decisions bent in her direction. People learned that compliance was easier than conflict, and HOA Karen learned that fear worked better than respect. The structure itself enabled her. HOA boards thrive on technicalities, fines, and vague standards that can be interpreted however the person in charge chooses. What qualified as an eyesore or disturbance was never clearly defined, and HOA Karen exploited that ambiguity ruthlessly. She enforced selectively, targeting people she perceived as weaker, newer, or isolated. Families who questioned her decisions found themselves buried under citations and warnings that never quite crossed into illegality, but always crossed into intimidation. She carried that same behavior into the school environment. She wasn't a teacher, she wasn't staff, but she behaved as though proximity to influence gave her jurisdiction. She volunteered aggressively, inserted herself into spaces meant for supervision, and treated children as extensions of their parents' compliance. In her mind, correcting a child was the same as correcting a rule violation. The difference between authority and abuse never registered with her. Complaints about HOA Karen existed long before she touched my daughter. They were scattered, informal, and carefully downplayed. A parent mentioned she yelled at a teenager for skateboarding. A cashier described being humiliated so thoroughly she quit her job. A neighbor recalled HOA Karen screaming over decorations that stayed up too long. None of it escalated because each incident was treated as isolated, inconvenient, and easier to ignore than confront. That pattern mattered. Abuse rarely announces itself as a single catastrophic act. It builds through repetition and permission. HOA Karen had been rehearsing dominance for years, and no one had stopped her. By the time she grabbed my daughter's hair, she wasn't improvising. She was executing a behavior she believed was protected. Her language always centered on order and respect, but her actions revealed obsession with control. Respect, in her world, was obedience without question. Disagreement was defiance. Silence was compliance. Children were expected to submit, and adults were expected to look the other way. She mistook her ability to intimidate for moral authority, and the HOA structure rewarded that mistake by never correcting it. The school environment should have been a boundary she couldn't cross. It wasn't. Her involvement blurred lines that should have been enforced strictly. Familiarity bred entitlement. She believed her status granted her access, her presence granted her power, and her anger granted her permission. No one had ever formally challenged that belief. When I reviewed the witness statements later, a theme emerged. People weren't shocked that HOA Karen lost her temper. They were shocked by how far she went. That distinction mattered. It meant they had already normalized her behavior up to a point. They had accepted her raised voice, her public scolding, her invasive posture as unpleasant but tolerable. The moment she crossed into physical violence, the illusion collapsed. But collapse only happens when pressure is applied. Without it, abuse adapts and continues. HOA Karen's mistake wasn't that she was cruel. It was that she targeted someone whose protection didn't end with sympathy. The HOA structure had shielded her for years, but it couldn't shield her from accountability once the line was crossed publicly and documented. She believed the system existed to serve her. She believed titles insulated her from consequences. She believed people like me would choose discretion over confrontation. That belief was the product of a structure that never corrected her, never challenged her, and never reminded her that authority without restraint is not authority at all. By the time I finished assembling her history, the pattern was undeniable. HOA Karen wasn't a sudden problem. She was a long-standing one that finally met resistance. And once resistance appeared, everything she had built began to crack. Discovery did not arrive with emotion. It arrived with clarity. The moment I stepped back into my office and shut the door, the chaos of the school dissolved into something colder and more precise. This was the phase where feelings stopped leading, and facts took control. I had already held my daughter. I had already promised her safety. Now it was time to make sure those promises had weight behind them. The first thing I requested was the security footage. Not a summary, not a clip, the raw file, every second, every angle, every timestamp intact. Systems don't lie when they're left unedited, and I needed the truth preserved exactly as it happened. The footage arrived quickly, transferred without commentary, because even the administrators understood that explanation was no longer their role. I watched it alone the first time. No pauses, no rewinds. I needed to see it the way a jury would, uninterrupted and unforgiving. My daughter stood in line exactly where she said she was. Still, quiet, waiting. There was no chaos before HOA Karen entered the frame. No provocation, no argument, just a child existing where she was allowed to exist. Then, HOA Karen appeared, moving with purpose, cutting through the space like she owned it. Even without audio, her body language told the story. The sharp turn of her shoulders, the aggressive lean, the way she invaded my daughter's space without hesitation. You don't need sound to recognize rage when it's directed downward. When her hand closed around my daughter's hair, the video captured it in horrifying clarity, fingers twisting, a sharp pull, my daughter's head snapping back in reflexive shock, her hands lifting instinctively, not to fight, but to protect. That moment alone dismantled every future excuse. There is no justification for grabbing a child like that. None. I paused the footage then, not because I couldn't watch it, but because I needed to compartmentalize what came next. Emotional reactions are expected. Emotional mistakes are not. I called my deputy in and we watched it again, this time stopping at key moments, frame by frame, distance, force, duration, every element that mattered. Medical reports came next. They matched the footage perfectly. Scalp bruising consistent with hair being forcibly pulled, a sprained wrist from resistance, abrasions on the knees from being dragged, trauma that could not be dismissed as accidental or minor. Documentation transformed injury into evidence, and evidence does not negotiate. Witness statements followed. Teachers, staff, parents, even children interviewed carefully and appropriately. The consistency was striking. Different voices, same details, same sequence, same shock. No contradictions, no confusion. The story did not shift because it did not need to. Truth tends to hold its shape. One detail surfaced repeatedly. HOA Karen's expression after the assault. Not panic, not regret, satisfaction. Multiple witnesses described it the same way, using different words that all pointed to the same conclusion. She believed she had done the right thing. That belief mattered more than anger ever could. It spoke to intent. I requested HOA Karen's history next, not because I needed it to justify charges, but because patterns reveal escalation. What came back confirmed what witnesses had hinted at. Prior complaints, no arrests, no charges. Just enough noise to be noticed and then buried. Incidents written off as temperament, behavior excused as personality. Each report on its own looked survivable. Together, they formed a trajectory. A woman who had been testing boundaries for years and learning repeatedly that she could get away with it. Authority, unchallenged, becomes entitlement. Entitlement uncorrected becomes violence. I compiled everything into a single file: footage, medical records, statements, prior complaints. Chronology matters in cases like this. It shows progression. It shows inevitability. HOA Karen didn't snap. She arrived exactly where unchecked behavior leads. By the time the file was complete, there was no ambiguity left to argue over. The evidence did not require interpretation. It required action. This was no longer about community mediation or apologies. This was about a public assault on a child with documented proof and a clear history of abuse of authority. The discovery phase ended the moment the facts aligned perfectly. From that point forward, everything that happened to HOA Karen was not punishment driven by emotion. It was consequence driven by proof. The confrontation did not happen in a courtroom or behind closed doors, where narratives can be softened and details negotiated. It happened in the open, where HOA Karen had always felt safest because she believed public spaces belonged to her. She had spent years weaponizing visibility, using it to embarrass, intimidate, and dominate. It was only fitting that visibility would be the thing that dismantled her completely. I went to her home in uniform, not because I needed the symbolism, but because I needed there to be no confusion about who was standing in front of her. The house itself told the story she wanted the world to believe. Manicured lawn, pristine exterior, the kind of place designed to project control and success. It was the physical extension of her authority fantasy, and she opened the door, expecting to continue that performance. She wasn't afraid when she saw me. She was irritated. That detail mattered. Fear would have meant awareness. Irritation meant she still believed she was insulated. She spoke to me the way she spoke to everyone else, with thinly veiled contempt and rehearsed confidence. She referred to the incident as discipline. She minimized my daughter's injuries. She framed herself as the wronged party. I told her calmly what the charges were: assault of a minor, child endangerment, public disturbance. Each word landed heavier than the last, but she didn't absorb them. She laughed. She actually laughed. She told me children exaggerate. She told me parents these days don't teach respect. She told me if I spent less time playing sheriff and more time being a mother, none of this would have happened. That was the moment the mask slipped completely. Not because she insulted me, but because she exposed the core belief driving everything she did. She believed authority excused cruelty. She believed status erased harm. She believed my role as a mother diminished my role as a professional instead of strengthening it. I arrested her then. Not loudly, not theatrically. I read her rights in a steady voice and told her to turn around. She refused. She invoked her husband, her connections, her HOA position. She threatened lawsuits and consequences she no longer had the power to deliver. Neighbors began emerging from their homes, drawn by raised voices and the unmistakable tension of something unraveling. When I placed the cuffs on her wrists, the shift was immediate and visible. Her posture changed. Her voice cracked. The confidence drained from her face in stages, replaced first by disbelief, then by rage, and finally by fear. The performance she relied on no longer had an audience willing to play along. The walk to the patrol car was slow and deliberate. Not because I needed to savor it, but because every step mattered. People were watching. Phones were out. HOA Karen kept talking, her words spilling faster as her control evaporated. She told anyone who would listen that this was a mistake, that she would destroy me in court, that I was abusing my power. No one intervened. No one defended her. At the station, the collapse continued. Processing stripped away the last remnants of her constructed identity. Fingerprints replaced influence. A mugshot replaced curated appearances. Paperwork replaced intimidation. She complained constantly, grasping for the smallest sense of dominance left to her. But procedure does not bend to entitlement. News traveled fast. By morning, the town knew. By afternoon, the footage was everywhere. The image of HOA Karen dragging my daughter by the hair was no longer something she could control or spin. It belonged to everyone now, and everyone saw it for what it was. Institutions responded decisively once public exposure removed plausible deniability. The HOA called an emergency meeting and voted her out. The school banned her from campus. Organizations quietly severed ties. The social capital she had relied on for protection vanished overnight, replaced by distance and silence. Public collapse is not loud when it's real. It is isolating. HOA Karen did not lose everything in a single dramatic moment. She lost it in layers, as each system she depended on withdrew support and left her standing alone with the evidence of her actions. By the time she realized no one was coming to save her, it was already over. The authority she had built through fear and compliance dissolved under scrutiny. and what remained was a woman facing consequences without a shield. That was the moment HOA Karen understood she was no longer in control. Retaliation did not come in the form HOA Karen expected. There were no raised voices from officials, no dramatic speeches about justice, no personal vendettas masquerading as legal action. What came instead was far more devastating to someone like her. It was expert attention, quiet, relentless procedural attention that stripped emotion from the equation and reduced her actions to statutes, precedent, and consequence. Once the case moved beyond arrest and into formal review, specialists took over. Prosecutors who had no personal connection to me or my daughter reviewed the file with clinical detachment. They didn't see HOA Karen as a personality. They saw her as a set of behaviors mapped cleanly onto criminal codes. Assault of a minor, aggravating factors, abuse of authority. Each charge fit without stretching, and that precision left no room for theatrical defense. Expert witnesses were consulted early. Child psychologists reviewed the footage and medical records, not to speculate, but to explain impact. They spoke about trauma responses, about fear conditioning, about how public humiliation amplifies harm in developing minds. They explained how a single incident like this can alter a child's sense of safety permanently. HOA Karen's behavior was reframed not as an emotional lapse, but as an act with predictable, measurable damage. Medical experts corroborated what the footage showed. The injuries were consistent with force, not restraint. The wrist injury was consistent with resistance. The scalp bruising was consistent with hair being pulled violently, not accidentally. Every attempt to minimize her actions collapsed under professional scrutiny. Facts stacked neatly, indifferent to her status or intentions. The defense tried to pivot, as expected. They leaned on language like overreaction and momentary stress. They highlighted HOA Karen's community involvement, her volunteer hours, her supposed good character. Experts dismantled those arguments without raising their voices. Character references do not negate physical evidence. Stress does not justify violence. Authority does not grant immunity. Courtroom proceedings moved with deliberate speed. The judge did not allow theatrics. Motions were heard, considered, and denied when they lacked merit. Objections were overruled when they attempted to distract rather than clarify. HOA Karen sat through it all, watching the system she thought she understood operate in a way she had never experienced before. This was not a forum she could dominate. When sentencing arguments were made, the contrast between narratives was stark. The defense spoke about inconvenience, reputation, and future discomfort. The prosecution spoke about harm, accountability, and deterrence. Experts reinforced that children cannot advocate for themselves in moments like these, and that the law exists specifically to address that imbalance. The sentence reflected that understanding. Jail time was not framed as revenge. It was framed as consequence. Probation was not framed as mercy. It was framed as oversight. Restrictions on authority were not framed as punishment. They were framed as prevention. Every component was designed to limit her ability to harm again. What broke HOA Karen was not the length of the sentence. It was the language used to justify it. She was no longer described as influential or respected. She was described as dangerous in the context of authority. That designation followed her through every document, every ruling, every record. It could not be argued away. Experts testified that accountability matters not just for victims, but for communities. Allowing someone like HOA Karen to escape consequences reinforces the very power dynamics that enable abuse. The court agreed. The retaliation was not personal. It was structural. The system corrected itself by isolating the threat and neutralizing its reach. When proceedings concluded, there was no speech, no closing statement meant for public consumption. There was simply a final order entered into record and enforced without ceremony. HOA Karen was escorted away, not as a fallen leader or a misunderstood volunteer, but as a convicted offender whose authority had been permanently revoked. That was the expert retaliation she never anticipated. Not outrage, not humiliation, just irreversible removal from power, executed with precision. Victory did not arrive with applause, speeches, or celebration. It arrived quietly, the way stability always does after chaos has burned itself out. The world did not stop to acknowledge what had happened, and that was exactly how it was supposed to be. When true power collapses, it does not leave behind fireworks. It leaves behind absence. HOA Karen stopped being mentioned almost immediately, not because people forgot what she did, but because she no longer mattered. Her name carried no authority, no fear, no relevance. The spaces she once dominated continued without her, smoother and lighter than before. Meetings happened without tension. Hallways felt safer. Children moved through shared spaces without adults hovering in judgment. My daughter did not heal all at once. Healing never works that way. It came in fragments, in nights without nightmares, in mornings where she didn't hesitate before leaving the house, in laughter that returned without checking the room first. She stopped flinching when someone brushed past her. She stopped shrinking when an adult raised their voice nearby. Those changes were small, but they were permanent. We never spoke about HOA Karen unless Emma brought her up first. When she did, it was without fear. It was with clarity. She understood that what happened was wrong, not confusing. That understanding mattered more than any sentence handed down in court. It meant the violence did not rewrite her sense of self. The systems that failed her once adjusted. Policies changed. Boundaries were enforced. Adults who had previously stayed silent learned what silence costs. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew why those changes happened. They were built on consequence, not intention. I went back to my routines. Work resumed its normal rhythm. The badge went on in the morning and came off at night. Authority returned to being a responsibility instead of a weapon. At home, I stayed what I had always been, a mother who brushed her daughter's hair slowly, a mother who listened when words came out uneven, a mother who understood that protection doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like consistency. HOA Karen did not resurface. She did not rebuild. She did not reclaim anything she lost. Her removal was complete because it was quiet. No appeals changed the outcome. No narrative softened the record. She existed only in files now, in documentation that did not care who she once thought she was. One afternoon, long after the case closed, I watched my daughter stand confidently in a crowded room, laughing without restraint, taking up space without apology. No one was watching her with authority. No one was measuring her behavior. She was just a child, exactly as she should have been all along. That was the victory. Not punishment, not recognition, not validation from strangers. Just the restoration of something that should never have been taken. HOA Karen lost her power the moment the system stopped responding to her voice. No one argued after that.